Now your host, an advocate for the people and our Constitution, Denise Mraz.
Hi there, KKV land people, and it's another great Tuesday in Las Vegas. So yesterday, Governor Sisolak told us that we won't be moving on to Phase 3. I'd love your thoughts on that, and you can call in at 702-650-KKVV. Now, there is a great attorney up in Reno. He's from Las Vegas, but his name's Joey Gilbert. Joey Gilbert's firm, the Joey Gilbert Law Firm, has that class action lawsuit going for not just churches, but also for small businesses. And you can still get in on the action. If you need a link to Joey, you can come to righttoworship.com. We've got a link there. And that's for any small business and or church. But the hearing happened last week where the judge heard the case for the injunction against the governor stopping churches from congregating with not just the ban on more than 50 people, but in general, all of the constraints put on people's right to worship and right to assemble. So far, we're waiting for the judge to let us know what his thoughts are on that. But let's just look at the judge himself. Wouldn't the judge be able to just pick up the Constitution and read the very first amendment? Now, you'd think this would be pretty simple, right? Because this is kind of why we have a Bill of Rights. But sadly, that's not happening. And in the amendment, in the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law representing an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, the peaceably assembling, let's just get that one out there. A lot of these protests that are happening and the riots, they're at night, and they're at a time when the government's not in session, which is 9 to 5. So right there, there should be an absolute, I guess, to me, a grievance of the people for these rioters to sadly stop rioting and start peaceably assembling, which if they're going to do it from 9 to 5 and address the government at the Grant Sawyer building at the City Hall, I can see that. But no, they've gone out into Summerlin. They've gone out in different places. Now, people, I'm an investigative reporter, as you know, and people send me tips all the time. And I'll just read you this one that came a couple days ago. So here's the news, okay? Basically, what happened was the sheriff's office arrested several people. However, they never booked them. So because they were never booked, it was about 22 people, according to my source. Because they were never booked, we'll never know who they are. They'll have no confirmed identity. Well, to add insult to injury to the taxpayer-funded police department, not only did they not book these people, of course they were not indicted, they were just arrested and then let go. The police department and policemen in the department had to then drive these protesters back to their hotels. All of them. They all went to hotels. What does that tell us? That they didn't live here. Because if they lived here, they would have got a ride back to their domicile, right? To their residence. But they didn't. They got a ride back to their hotel. So anybody that's saying to you that these protesters are well-meaning citizens and they're individuals for freedom, well, they're not. In this particular case, they were all staying in a hotel, and we know that they're from out of town. There's been lots of sources and evidence that Soros-paid groups are bringing these people in and providing them with backpacks of rocks to throw, and, other items to throw at the police, guns, bricks, weights, etc. So there's lots of that going on. And then let's just look at what's happening in Seattle. We've got the Democrats over here on the left, right? And they're saying, hey, let's not build a wall. We don't need any walls. We should let everyone in. That's their premise for existence, is that everyone has a right to travel. Well, they don't. They don't have a right to travel in the United States from another country. But what do the protesters, rioters in Seattle, what's the first thing they do? They build a barricade wall. Now, they're being furnished with guns from who knows what source. But have you seen pictures of these people? They look like kids that sit around on, you know, Game Boys, and they're video game warriors. Well, in video games, you never get killed, but you get points for killing other people. And a lot of them, World of Warcraft and, all of these other fantasy worlds that they live in. So lately, the Seattle mayor has been sending them food, but a post went out today from a Seattle resident that lives near the district. And what they do is they have people that are funneling in and bringing them, food and clothing, water, etc. And they're starting to basically passively loot certain homes near the site, the Six Flags site that's walled off. And they're approaching the people. First, they do it kind of nicely. But if they're not given something, if they're not given something of value or food or drinks or anything, then the people are like, hey, we're going to come back at night and break down your windows. We're going to put water in your gas tank. I mean, they're basically, everybody that's helping them now has to do so out of compulsory mandated threat by the posse that's helping the protesters. So that's what's going on in Seattle. And if you know more about that situation, I'd love to hear about it. But um, sadly, our country is being run right now by people who are convinced that communism is a good thing for America and it'll bring us more freedom because big government will take care of us. Well, people that follow Christ know that we were given all of our own faculties to advance our individual sovereignty by our own hand, by our own mind, by our own hearts. And this is obviously what we're seeing in society is a complete breakdown of our civil liberties to advance the agenda of the Communist Manifesto. And I know a lot of you know what that is, and you know about Saul Alinsky, so I won't go into that. But let's go back to the right to worship. So I posted an article this week, and it was from the Federalist.com, and it basically said, hey, I wish these pastors would be as boisterous and passionate about their faith as the protesters. And I started looking around and digging a little bit. Well, a lot of the protesters are doing their part, but the pastors have, a lot of them have applied for the small business funds, and many of them have received some. So I'm just wondering, are they abiding by these tyrannical government requirements because they got the COVID money? And if your church got COVID money, I'd love to know how much, because I haven't been able to find statistics on churches that received it. So did they apply for, I mean, churches are a corporation, right? They're just nonprofit corporation. So have they applied for funds and received 20% of what they normally would take in, say, in a month? Or what kind of funds are they getting? So if you know the answer to that question, call in, let me know. And I just wanted to give a shout out to the people that are going to churches that aren't participating in the contact tracing and these other programs. So what some churches are doing is they're doing the social distancing. They've stopped singing because people are breathing in and out more in a church, which is such a crazy thought. And they have started registering members. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see where this is all going, because the idea of contact tracing was you or I attend Walmart, we attend a church, and then somebody gets COVID. Well, you can't get COVID, but that's what the news is saying, the propaganda news. So they get COVID. Now they can go to the registry of the church that's participated in the contact tracing and see all the people that were in the church. Then they could say all those people are on quarantine. That was the goal of the contact tracing, and that those people have to quarantine for 2 weeks. Now, if I drove over to Arizona a few weeks ago, and on my way back, the big sign coming into Nevada stated that if you left the state, because I had bought something on eBay and I could go pick it up, so I went to pick it up, and when I came back, the sign said, if you've left the state, you have to self-quarantine in your house for 2 weeks. That's what the big digital billboards say. So obviously no one's doing it, but you see where they're going with everything. Well, the contact tracing for churches is the same. They're making the list, they want to be able to see who's there, and then be able to compel, force, or mandate either a fake vaccine that's not going to heal you, but that's actually going to chip you. So that was one of the things. But the fact that these churches are complying are flying in the face of our constitutional rights and principles of endowed liberties. Which, I mean, I'm looking here in the Constitution. Let's read the amendment, the First Amendment again. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So, does it say anywhere in the Constitution that we have to sign up, that we have to be a member, that only 50 of us can gather at one time, that we have to stay parked in our cars? No, it doesn't say any of that. But these oppressive governors have decided that that's the way they're going to try to drive every church out of business. So we have to look at places like Canada that are just a little bit ahead of us, just maybe a half a step ahead of us in implementing the Communist Manifesto for right to worship. And we look at Trudeau, who is obviously a lot of people have said that he's related to Castro. Who knows? But if we look at what they're doing, they are trying to silence Christian voices by silencing Christian pastors. And the path they're going down is, get this, the ministers have to register with the state, with Canada, whatever, Quebec, Ontario. But they're starting to compel them that because they're, I guess it's basically the word is counselor, but they're using other legal terms, that now they have to be licensed counselors. Well, if you or I want to go have a master's in philosophy or sociology or psychology, we're free to do that. But if you or I have a great message and and a personality and a delivery that warrants that, hey, we set up a religious community and we help that community, now Canada is trying to put parentheses around that and said, well, you can only do that if you're a licensed counselor. So we're letting our government expand what they believe is their right to limit us and our freedom of speech. And there's so many laws. There's 1,000 dumb laws. Let me give you an example. In Nevada, if you don't have the correct wattage bulb on your flag at night, you can get fined money. If you spit on the sidewalk, you can get fined. And all of these things are obviously unconstitutional taxes, but they're just a way for the government to rein us in, come after us, and believe me, there are more than 1,000 dumb laws on the books. I've got a whole list of them. When I find it, I'm going to bring it into the studio and read that. But what I would love to do is read for you now this great article. So, Kamal Bakari is running in Congressional District 1 against Dina Titus. And obviously, Dina Titus is a knee on the neck of Nevada. And she's got a very special role in Congress. She has not only um, I'll call it a committee chair on a bunch of committees, but she's a Harry Reid Politico. So between herself and Harry Reid, she's very much in control of her district, which is basically all of Las Vegas Boulevard from Lake Mead down to the airport, and then across from Durango all the way over to Hollywood. And this is a very large district, encompasses Old Las Vegas, the New Strip, all of the great areas that have all the casinos. Well, she is basically in control of the casinos because of where she sits on congressional committees and her Harry Reid politicos that are intertwined with her in the Gaming Commission. So we've got Kamal Bakari, who's a strong conservative, American independent. He's running in Congressional District 1. And he's a very fine black American with a strong conservative platform. I hope you'll check him out at electbakari.com. And his Facebook is Bakari the Bolt. He's on Twitter and Parler, so check that out. But he wrote a great article today. Century plus old race wars seeds sown for Black Lives Matter harvest every 4 years. And I'll just read it to you real quick. In 2020 is a bumper crop. Look who's telling whites they're racist and supremacists, telling blacks they aren't free. This is getting old. So by Kamal Bakari. Let's break the sad sow and reap history of black Americans who have been harvested by soft bigotry communists, determined to keep them on a pretend victimhood plantation. Let's lift up whites who have been zombified into apologists for slavery. No one living today had a hand in that history. I mean, let's face it. In fact, Burgess Owens tweeted this yesterday. Why do black lives only matter every 4 years? Maybe black lives should matter even when there isn't a presidential election. Now, one of the most poignant stories illustrating this is the story of Du Bois in Washington. And I'll read it to you. The turning point was around the late 1890s when this conversation took place. Booker T. Washington, a slave himself, created a skilled workforce trade program that became a university. W.E.B. Du Bois, a Negro, was a Marxist socialist whose sociology theories favored communism because he didn't believe Negroes or whites could think for themselves. He started the NAACP as an African American, and he didn't identify as a black American. He identified as an African American. There were other people present, but the two most prominent were Booker T. Washington and sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois. The discussion centered around the so-called race relations in the United States. Booker T. Washington and his supporters took the position that since the Negro was no longer enslaved, that the best way to get along with the white man was to become valuable in society by exercising his free agency to make his way. The trades were the most available pathways to economic freedom, to exercise free agency, which is why Booker T. Washington favored the self-made man and through his industry, by his work, uplifting of the Negro. And his conclusion, people will want to be around you because you would be constructive and not a burden. Let's let them off the hook, said Washington. Now W.E.B. Du Bois became angry at what he considered Washington's cavalier attitude and glib response regarding an empowered Negro mindset. Du Bois didn't believe Negroes couldn't think for themselves and whites couldn't either. Thus, he promoted communism for both Negroes and whites. Du Bois stated, "Oh no, we have been treated too bad for too long to let them white men off that easy." Du Bois favored a victimhood approach for the future of Negroes, which was adopted as the foundational ideology of the NAACP. Then, out of respect for Mr. Washington, Du Bois proposed a settlement. "I'll tell you what, let's let some of them, white men, off the hook, and other white men we will continue to blame for our problems and seek some sort of compensation." Now, Mr. Washington replied in the spirit of cooperation, thinking it's a start, "Okay, but how do you divide them up? How do you divide the white man up?" And Mr. Du Bois' reply is this: "Oh, that's easy. We will do it in a way that can be measured. Let's blame the Republicans and demand reparations, since they abandoned us during Reconstruction of the South, and we'll favor the Democrats, since most of us live around them anyway." "Oh, that'll never work," came Mr. Washington's response. "Why not?" asked Du Bois. Washington stated, "Because white folks are not that stupid." Well, here we are 125 plus years later, and we are bearing witness to an arbitrary division set about by Du Bois, witnessed by Booker T. Washington. Now, Du Bois turned to communism as the means to achieve equality. He supported the Marxist lie of all's well-being communism and did not promote communism's truth. It's good only for the elitist leaders and its system of oppression. But contrastingly, Booker T. Washington was born into slavery and rose to becoming a leading black American intellectual of the 19th century, founding Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, now Tuskegee University, in 1881, to train a skilled workforce. And of course, it grew from there. But what will it take for those still left in the victimhood state of mind living instead of thriving in liberty by mindful living? Even today's black voices are standing up to the program lies, such as Herschel Walker. And here's a tweet that was Donald Trump did thank Herschel for this tweet on May 23rd. Herschel Walker said this: "Wow, I just watched former Vice President Joe Biden. Does he not understand that black and brown skinned people can think for themselves? You don't determine who we vote for." And isn't that so true that every 4 years there's this big ramp up and escalation on the vote for black voices? And it's all by the people who lie to them. Those who wish to divide us will continue to lie. I agree with Burgess Owens when he validated this in an interview last week with Sarah Carter. I agree with Burgess Owens when he said, "What we have to understand is that they, the Marxists, will continue to lie. That's what godless people do. There's no shame, there's no consciousness. Their end game is power." The white apologists are no different. They are walking down the exact same path, but with a different goal, which is productive debt slavery. The fact of the matter is, America's youth and some Americans have been misled by an education indoctrination who teaches victimhood history, others by slavery through control and indebtedness. The only debt anyone owes anyone is an apology for a trespass, but narcissists never apologize. And here's the harvest. Black Lives Matter harvest every 4 years is never ending. They harvest the uninformed voters who won't defend their liberties because they aren't educated to believe they have them, and radicalize them. BLM harvests the money from supporters on their website, which is funneled through a PAC called Act Blue. And this even funds Kamau Bakari's opponent, Dina Titus, through the Democratic congressional campaign. Just the salaries for the Black Lives Matter machine are, guess how much? They're over $15 million. That's just the salaries to run Black Lives Matter. What a machine, huh? So then you can go on the PAC, and the article has a graph that shows how much money they take in administratively, but then also how much money all of the candidates get. So Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, they've all gotten millions and millions and millions of dollars from Black Lives Matter. And if Black lives really mattered, these communist politicians would be standing with me in defense of all life, especially the unborn. But the only lives they care about are the ones who give them money to fund communism, the ultimate corporatism of big government, big everything scam of the century. Now, here's another quote from Black Sheriff Clark. He states, if Black lives mattered, they protested abortion clinics, particularly at Planned Parenthood. And I agree with him. Now, he said that a while back in 2014, but nothing's changed. So, Kamau asked, join him to jam the gears of the reap and sow machine, which has its roots in communism. Try something different and vote your liberty heart in November. Vote Kamau Bakari. And you can see his Facebook post at Bakari the Bolt and Parlor the Bolt, Tweeter Bakari Kamau. So look him up if you live in CD1 or you are interested in politics in Clark County. He's a great one to follow because he's not on a party platform, and he obviously has to state all his views. The party platform of the American Independent Party is actually very conservative. They do reach out to the LGBTQ community more broadly than the GOP, but hey, the GOP isn't against LGBTQ in any way. In fact, SCOTUS wrote a very conservative opinion about LGBTQ, and that went out. Hey, Warren, do you remember when that opinion came out? Was it Friday or yesterday?
I think it, I
This,
think it was yesterday.
okay, yeah, SCOTUS had the 6-3 vote for non-discrimination of LGBTQ on the job, which I totally agree with. I mean, people are people, and you know what you are doesn't matter as long as you're skilled and you can do your job. And so I completely agree with that decision, but a lot of conservatives are upset because they believe that you know this is not a biblical conservatism. But let's just look at this scenario. If that's your view, I'll challenge you with this thought. Biblical conservatism says love everybody. However, on the other hand, there's lots of things in the Bible that are, pro family and consider the gay population to be non biblical in different ways. But consider this: a mother takes her child for immunizations, and she doesn't know that the immunizations, when they are given in flights to newborns, that they are mitigating testosterone in boys and also hormone development in infant girls. So these responsible parents thought that the vaccines were safe, trusted their pediatricians, and administered all of these vaccines. Now, right now, pediatricians have a schedule, and if they can force your 2-year-old or less to have over 60 vaccines in 2 years, and that's done mainly in flights, um, that now you can have those at 5, 6, 7 vaccines at a time at the wellness visit. Well, it's a mitigation of testosterone in boys. So that boy now will never grow up to his full masculinity and never realize it. And so the child is given GMO food, is vaccinated, and now he can't realize his potential as a very, his full masculinity because his hormones are not there to develop that. And sadly, the parents have gone with their trust of their medical provider, and the medical providers were provided tainted vaccines from China. But also, yesterday in the news, the NIH has been under full investigation since September 19, 2019, over the flu shot. Well, since then, Trump's DOJ and DOD has been fanning out, and they have yesterday it was announced in Science magazine that 399 scientists just in the NIH have now been put on a list of basically suspects, and 51 of them have already been fired. No, 54. 54 were fired, but 399 were identified. So that's really going well for the American people because many of these scientists took money from China. And when these foundations and grants took in this money from China, they then geared the narrative of their research to basically fund toxic cocktails that they're calling immunizations, big pharma, and vaccines for the people. And this was all done by very high level leadership and scientists at NIH under Dr. Tony Fauci. So we know now, we absolutely have the evidence. And not only have they been fired, but a lot of these people now are going to be brought to justice through a trial. And it's mainly about the foreign influence over our vaccines and other things that are going on. So going back to the issue of transgenderism and gay life, if a person has been robbed of their ability to be their natural selves, it's no different with the feminism. So different hormones in women make us feel that nurturing, protective, loving person. And, have you ever poked a mama bear or seen one poked? You don't do that. And there's, in us, we have that protective quality. When the lion leaves the pride, the lioness takes over as alpha. And if we're not naturally geared in our chemical structure because that opportunity was robbed from us, then sadly, we cannot realize our full potential as girls, young teens, women. We don't have those nurturing qualities, but a lot of the effects of vaccines have, in fact, caused us to have a limbic brain function response to everything around us. So I'm sure you've all heard the term snowflake. Well, if something doesn't fit my narrative, I've got no frontal lobe cortex of discernment, wisdom, consideration, of reasonable response. I become an unreasonable person. Why? Because that part of my brain was chemically lobotomized by vaccines, and now the non-Socratic methods being used in Common Core have trained me as a child and a young adult to access my limbic brain function. Now, your limbic brain function is a fight, flight, sex, food, all the basic needs of people to survive. You're very much radicalized for your survival and your survival only. And that's why you see this massive escalation of people who can be radicalized by a trigger word, and they become triggered. In fact, Donald J. Trump Jr.'s book, Triggered, is a great read if you have a chance to pick it up. I've got a signed copy. But I'm just so, I'm lost for, unless we get God on our side to help us, unless we invite him into our lives, unless we ask him to help us with this massive problem that's affecting millions and millions of people and the mental health crisis, I don't know another way to get around it. Now, here's the great news. We know that Trump is implementing NESARA. NESARA is, and you can look that up on my blog, is basically the handing back of the constitutional republic to the people. So this week, Attorney General William Barr, he tweeted this out, which is so encouraging. And he said, "The Constitution is never suspended." Because you hear the Democrats talk about that a lot. Oh, this executive order by our state governor suspends the Constitution. Or people feel that a law can suspend your constitutional rights, such as your right as a student in public education or your right as a parent regarding your child's education. Well, Barr just put an end to all that. He dispelled the myth. He completely said this: the Constitution is never suspended. So, folks, if you don't think the Constitution is something that you ought to defend, then this is the only thing standing between us and Armageddon. And so I'm going to make 20 copies available here at the station. If you come down and visit us during our business hours, you can pick up a free copy. And I'll leave some here. And, just come on by and say hi. We're down here on Highland Drive next to Roll and Smoke Barbecue. And I'll give you a free Constitution. But I also did say that I would read the Federalist Papers this week as part of our Ignite Liberty. And this just in, Michelle Fiore stepped down as Mayor Pro Tem. Well, that's pretty interesting because if she didn't, she was going to be fired. So I'm sure we'll be getting a lot of information on that over the next few days. And somebody had called me during our show to say that. So I'm going to read you something here from the Federalist Papers, because that's what we're doing between now and July 4th is getting on those papers that obviously so many of us, virtually none of us, have ever even read anything about the Federalist Papers. And I did want to just bring up this quote, which is so great. So Donald Trump said this at the Jamestown 400th anniversary event on July 3rd last year. And this year, he's going to be at Mount Rushmore, right? So July 4th, nothing's going to stand in his way. It's going to be great. In fact, here's what he said: "The people shall forever rule. The people shall forever reign. The people shall always be sovereign." There's that word again, sovereign. Sovereignty is the lowest common denominator, or if you want to look at it conversely, the highest level of liberty. And look at all the ways our sovereignty has been denied us. It's been denied us in our education. It's been denied us by our big governments. And Trump is the only one talking about the word sovereign. And if we know about the sovereign citizen movement, we've been told lots of things about it that probably aren't true. Now, sovereign citizens didn't have it all right. They didn't have it all wrong. But I'll say they probably mostly had it right, which is why so many people are against the sovereign citizen movement, have given it a bad name so that you don't think that anything of it and that you ignore it. Don't ignore it. This sovereignty is the lowest common denominator of all of the underpinnings of the Liars Club. And the Liars Club are all the people that have lied to us. I mean, who doesn't remember Star Trek when there was only 7 channels, right? So Gene Roddenberry, he was the executive producer of Star Trek. Remember when Vulcan, non-emoting Leonard Nimoy came out and said, I'm going to have to go for that. Let me go to that exact quote because I've got it right here on my phone. I just posted this today, which was really fun. Let me see here. I'll get to it in a second. But, I mean, CIA run, the company, has been running a psyop against us using so many different programmings, and one, of course, was Hollywood. And this one here was so sad because how many people didn't know this, right? But that a lot of the scripting of Star Trek supported Marxism. I'm just really sad about that because as a kid I thought Vulcans were really cool, right? And it turns out they're just part of the Red Carpet Liars Club. So here's what it was. Remember when our TV only had 7 channels and thought Spock, the intelligent, unemoting Vulcan, was cool? And he said this: the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. Well, I unwittingly was marinated in Marxism because I love Star Trek and it was so cool. And you could, it's kind of like a passport, for an hour. And what they were promoting was instead of sovereignty truth, the fundamental principle of government was created to secure my rights, not to appease the collective, which is foreign to us. We are all individual sovereign people. We are a sovereign nation. And we always have this ebb and flow of tidal, foreign, you know, influence and foreign impulse. So thanks, Gene Roddenberry, right, for marinating me in Marxism through all of your collective Star Trek episodes. I had no idea I was being played, but now that I am, I just, and Star Wars is the same way. Star Wars was just written up, a very interesting article about all of the Illuminati connections to Star Wars, but that the good guy always wins until the resistance is pretty much ended because the very last Star Wars, remember that giant tidal wave comes and wipes them out, and I don't think there was a Star Wars after that. The one that's being made now will be the next one. But again, that's just a whole nother scripting thing, but that so much of what was in Star Wars is kind of the same way. So let me just go back here to the Federalist Papers, and we'll get to the one that we're going to work on today. And that is in here, the mode of electing president. Oh my gosh, there's so many good ones. The structure of the government. The structure of the government must furnish the proper checks and balances between the different departments. So this is from the New York Packet, published first on Friday, February 8th, 1788. And to the people of the state of New York: to what expedient, then, shall we finally resort for maintaining in practice the necessary partition of power among the several departments, as laid down in the Constitution? The only answer that can be given is that as all these exterior provisions are found to be inadequate, the defect must be supplied by so contriving the interior structure of the government as that its several constituent parts may, by their mutual relations, be the means of keeping each other in their proper places. Without presuming to undertake a full development of this important idea, I will hazard a few general observations, which may perhaps place it in a clearer light and enable us to form a more correct judgment of the principles and structure of the government planned by the Convention. In order to lay down a foundation for that separate and distinct exercise of the different powers of government, which to a certain extent is admitted on all hands to be essential to the preservation of liberty, it is absolutely evident that each department should have a will of its own, and consequently should be so constituted that the members of each should have as little agency as possible in the appointment of the members of the others. Were this principle rigorously adhered to, it would require that all the appointments for the supreme executive, legislative, and judicial magistracies should be drawn from the same fountain of authority, the people, through channels having no communication whatever with one another. Now, perhaps such a plan of constructing the several departments would be less difficult in practice than it may be in contemplation appear. Some difficulties, however, and some additional expenses would attend the execution of it. Some deviations, therefore, from the principle must be admitted, and in the constitution of the judiciary department in particular, it might be inexpedient to insist rigorously on the principle. First, because peculiar qualifications being essential in the members, the primary consideration ought to be to select the mode of choice which best secures these qualifications. Secondly, because the permanent tenure by which the appointments are held in that department must soon destroy all sense of dependence on the authority conferring them. So let's just take a break for a second. So, for example, Trump confers an executive appointment of a judge. So what they're saying is that only the relationship and sense of dependence must end once that judge is conferred, and as little dependence on possible on Trump, obviously. Um, and then it goes on to say that, particularly for judges, that's very true. But the great security against a gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. The provision for defense must in this, as in other cases, be made commensurate to the danger of attack. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself, but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. A dependence on the people is, no doubt, the primary control on the government, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. This policy of supplying, by opposite and rival interests, the defect of better motives might be traced through the whole system of human affairs, private as well as public. We see it particularly displayed in all the subordinate distributions of power, where the constant aim is to divide and arrange the several offices in such a manner as that each may be a check on the other, that the private interest of every individual may be a sentinel over the public rights. These inventions of prudence cannot be less requisite in the distribution of the supreme powers of the state. But it is not possible to give each department an equal power of self-defense. In republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. The remedy for this inconveniency is to divide the legislature into different branches, and to render them, by different modes of election and different principles of action, as little connected with each other as the nature of their common functions and their common dependence on the society will admit. It may be necessary to guard against dangerous encroachments by still further precautions. As the weight of the legislative authority requires that it should be thus divided, the weakness of the executive may require, on the other hand, that it should be fortified. An absolute negative on the legislature appears, at first view, to be the natural defense with which the executive magistrate should be armed. But perhaps it would be neither altogether safe nor alone sufficient. On ordinary occasions it might not be exerted with the requisite firmness, and on extraordinary occasions it might be perfidiously abused. May not this defect of an absolute negative be supplied by some qualified connection between this weaker department and the weaker branch of the stronger department, by which the latter may be led to support the constitutional rights of the former, without being too much detached from the rights of its own department? If the principles on which these observations are founded be just, as I persuade myself they are, and they be applied as a criterion to the several states' constitutions and to the federal constitution, it will be found that if the latter does not perfectly correspond with them, The former are infinitely less able to bear such a test. There are, moreover, two considerations particularly applicable to the federal system of America, which place that system in a very interesting point of view. First, in a single republic, all the power surrendered by the people is submitted to the administration of a single government, and the usurpations are guarded against by a division of the government into distinct and separate departments. In the compound Republic of America, the power surrendered by the people is first divided between two distinct governments, and then the portion allotted to each subdivided among distinct and separate departments. Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other. At the same time, they each will be controlled by itself. Second, it is of great importance in a republic not only to guard the society against the oppression of its rulers, but to guard one part of the society against the injustice of the other part. Different interests necessarily exist in different classes of citizens. If a majority be united by a common interest, the rights of the minority will be insecure. There are but two methods of providing against this evil. The one by creating a will in the community independent of the majority, that is, of the society itself. The other by comprehending in the society so many separate descriptions of citizens as will render an unjust combination of a majority of the whole very improbable, if not impracticable. And then it goes on to say that basically we are all self-appointed authority. And again, this particular Federalist paper does so focus on sovereignty and the rights of individuals, even if they're in the minority. But this one in particular is really great for that. So I'm just kind of scrolling down too because I wanted to kind of hit this one at the end. So even for the states, and it picks out the state of Rhode Island, it can be little doubted that if the state of Rhode Island was separated from the Confederacy and left to itself, the insecurity of rights under the popular form of government with such narrow limits would be displayed by reiterated oppressions of factious majorities, that some power altogether independent of the people would soon be called for by the voice of the very factions whose misrule had proved the necessity of it. So there's all of these themes in the Federalist Papers that are just echoing everything we have today. And obviously, the silent majority has so grown, and I don't think they're going to be silent anymore because so many people have been injured and hurt, particularly by manipulative governments that have just extremely disappointed us and have decimated the lives and livelihoods of people. In this, let me just close this Federalist 51. So it says here, and happily for the Republican cause, the Republic being the constitutional republic, for the Republican cause, the practicable sphere may be carried to a very great extent by a judicious modification and mixture of the federal principle. So you have to go back to the Declaration of Independence to read a lot of the principles. One, consent to the governed. Just keep remembering this. We, private citizens, created the government, and their only job is to give us the umbrella of peace, safety, and security in a way that helps us thrive, to decorate our lives, to exercise our liberty, and protect our property. And sadly, we have to retrain our brains. We've got kind of a software problem. The hardware's there, but now we have to kind of retrain it and work on the software part. And we've got to reprogram and get new software in there, and then we're really going to be flying. I see this election of 2020 coming up being amazing in its liberty. I don't think the Democrats are going to steal the election as long as we keep talking to each other and we keep the dialogue going and challenging each other. Just in the last few months, people on Facebook that my Facebook has around 2,400 people on it, and plus my personal Facebook has around 5,000. I'm shadow banned a lot, but I'm seeing the conversations turn more and more towards the fact that people who are waking up to the fact that our government does not give us our liberties, that they are, and we already have our liberties, they're endowed to us. They were protected by God's natural law, the rule of law, and that is to do no harm in whatever we're doing. And we see that in such a greatly illustrated in Trump's worldwide religious freedom executive order from last week. So he directed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to put out to the world that countries needing our aid are now going to be recognized based on how they respond to their citizens protecting their religious freedom. And he's defining religion as the ability to go out and exercise their freedom to believe what they want to believe, as long as it doesn't hurt another person. And I'm so encouraged by it because now we have extended constitutional protection to every citizen of the world. And this has never been done before. It's so exciting. But we have to start in our own community. And if you have a pastor who is still kowtowing to this governor, you've got to get a hold of him, email him, call him, whatever you need to do, and just tell him that he needs to step up to his duty and start administrating to his flock. And if he can't do that, and he's not going to stand up for you, who are his constituents, then maybe we need to have some serious discussions, or perhaps look for a church with a pastor who's providing a lot of leadership. The International Church on Alta Drive in Summerlin has basically said to their churchgoers that we're not going to go by the 50 rule. We're going to have as many people as want to come into the church because we know that this is unconstitutional. And kudos to the International Church for doing that. And I believe that's Pastor Richie. So our time is almost to a close today, but wanted to just thank you for giving me this opportunity again today to talk to you. And if you want to get a hold of me, I'm at the website Don't California Our Nevada, and you can check me out on my Facebook. I've got a Twitter page at Real Denise Mraz. And if you want, send me your questions and comments. And I'd love to hear from you on what you want to know next week. And we're going to be reading another Federalist paper and leading up to our 4th of July celebration at Mount Rushmore with Trump. Bye for now. It's Denise Mraz.